Greetings to you all. I've decided to say greetings rather than anything else because of the many time zones and more than 80 countries that dial into these leadership series. This is our 11th. We first started in September last year. We've looked at many subjects: geopolitics, technological revolution, innovation, environmental, and cyber, to name a few. The session is being recorded and we will try and answer as many of your questions as possible. Whilst the future of the seafarer is our topic today, please allow me at the outset to go off script and state yet again my own and our industry's bitter disappointment at the lack of action by far too many governments in adhering to the requirements of the Maritime Labour Convention, declaring seafarers as key workers and thereby playing their part in helping resolve the ongoing crew change issue. Less than half the countries, or about half the countries that ratified this Bill of Rights for seafarers, have in fact recognized seafarers as key workers. And despite some progress made in the second half of last year in dealing with the crew change crisis, the outbreak in South Africa, Brazil, and the UK have set us back. As industry, we at ICS, together with our many fellow associations, including the ITF, have since February of 2020 endeavored to highlight and address this issue. We have been to the G7, the G20, the UN, the EU, ASEAN. We were instrumental in organizing a transport ministers meeting in London last July, when many soothing words were uttered. We have appeared on numerous times on BBC, CNBC, CNN, and other outlets. We developed in record time in May last year, jointly with 15 other associations, a set of 12 protocols that were adopted and accepted by IMO and have since been updated a number of times. And yet, far too many seafarers still face huge difficulties getting home, despite these efforts by so many industry associations and by so many responsible ship owners who regularly end up chartering airplanes and finding other innovative and expensive ways to get the seafarers home and their replacement to join. The fact remains that seafarers, being out of sight and out of mind, are often simply forgotten. So yet again, please allow me to say that it is time for action, and I repeat, action, not endless words. Governments and populations the world over rely on shipping. I believe we have been doing and are doing everything humanly possible to literally deliver the goods. We have performed as an industry in extremely problematical circumstances. It is past time for countries and governments to deliver their part of their commitments. Lastly, let us see governments supporting our current strenuous efforts, now well underway, to prioritize vaccination of seafarers, and we will have a video at the end of this broadcast on our end. But we are also in the midst of technological and propulsion revolution. Digital transformation continues apace, and the ships of the future will be fueled by an array of fuels which will require specific and fundamental changes to the training and education of crews. The IMO regulatory framework for crew training, STCW, is frankly struggling to keep pace, and there is an increasing gap between meeting regulatory requirements and what is required of seafarers in practice. So what do we expect of our future seafarers? How can we ensure the safety and security of crews as the industry undergoes this enormous fundamental transformation? How do we attract the brightest and best talent to our industry? And how do we ensure that our industry is representative and welcoming to all? These are few of the waiting questions we are trying to address today, but I'm sure our wonderful panel is up to the task. And I'm firstly happy to welcome my friend and colleague, ICS Vice Chairman Dito Borromeo. Dito is CEO of Philippine Transmarine Carriers in Manila, one of the world's largest global crew management companies, with a pool of over 65,000 seafarers, of which 35,000 on board at any one time. Welcome, Dito. And now to Stephen Cotton, tireless champion of the Seafarer. Stephen is the General Secretary of the International Transport Workers Federation, the ITF, a global federation with nearly 700 unions representing around 20 million workers across maritime, port, aviation, road, rail, and urban sectors. Welcome, Stephen. Our next panel is Maite Medina. Maite is the chief at the Office of Merchant Mariner Credential at the U.S. Coast Guard, where she develops and manages legislative and regulatory issues concerning merchant vessel personnel and labor issues. She leads the U.S. delegation to the IMO on maritime safety and security, and also chairs the IMO Human Element Training and Watchkeeping Subcommittee. A particularly warm welcome to you, Maite, and thank you for getting up at this rather early hour. As I said before, I hope you have some nice black coffee. Our lineup is completed by Despina Theodosiou. Despina is joint CEO of a digital solutions company called Tototheo Maritime, and she is also president of WISTA, the Women's International Shipping and Trading Association, and a warm welcome to you as well, Despina. Tito, I'm going to start with you. 2020 has clearly been a year of the impact of the pandemic, and it is still being keenly felt. You were part of our inaugural series back in September. So can you now tell us what has changed and what are the key issues as you see them in crew supply? Are you anticipating a crisis in recruitment after what the seafarers experienced over the past year? Tito, please.
Well, thank you, Esben, and good evening to everyone from Manila. Before anything else, let me thank ICS for continuing this Leadership Insight series, now on its 11th edition, so where we can discuss a lot of important topics for the industry and hopefully bring the rest of the general public into a discussion. And thank you for the invitation to join you. I guess, Esben, maybe we can frame that discussion by saying that one way to describe the events of the last 12 months would be to say that just as we thought we had all the answers lined up, the third wave of this virus strikes and we're back into a tailspin again. And unfortunately, the lockdowns, which were draconian in measures in certain areas, while they worked initially, their economies today are very, very hard pressed to continue such a situation. So we're just going to have to navigate our way through. I guess if you look at it from a crew supply standpoint, from the Philippine perspective, there is not going to be a shortage of seafarers. There is still a lot of keen interest to go to sea. The challenge, however, is how do we facilitate that movement given the roadblocks that have unfortunately come in and you just described so eloquently at the beginning. I think our future dialogue, though, will have to talk about three things if we are going to frame sustainability beyond the post-COVID situation. And that would be needing to talk about people in relation to process and technology. And I'd like to emphasize technology in particular, because as you pointed out, technology is changing very rapidly. If we consider Moore's Law, which talks about the doubling of computing power every 18 to 24 months, systems on board ships, equipment, they're going to change very rapidly. And that means, as you pointed out, the education and training of our people are going to have to change as well. No question that as technology takes shape, the kind of education and training that will be required is going to change. And certainly there will be competition to attract the people into our industry. And we have to talk about the fact that what the people do as tonnage enablers. We like to think of our global maritime professionals as tonnage enablers, and their job is not. I think it's not enough to say that they earn good money. We have to look at the value-added contribution of their working on vessels and their ability to move a ship from one port to the other, and the contribution that has had on the entire global trade system. And if we look at the fact that over the last 12 months, when the rest of the world seemed to fall apart, it was the shipping industry that did the heavy lifting, that continued to do the heavy lifting. And it was a sacrifice of many, many maritime professionals that allowed our ships to continue to move forward. We've got to be able to build on that image, tie that back into a kind of education and training program, which gives everyone a chance to understand how changes will take place on board a vessel, and be able to create an interest in where we can go. And that will be a challenge. But as I mentioned, from the Philippine perspective, we're not going to be short of people, but we have to do a lot more in terms of education and training. And here's where the network of ship owners, ship managers, crew managers, global institutions can come together to be able to lay that career path and in order to effectively attract the best and the brightest.
Thank you very much, Tito. That's a very interesting and, in a way, encouraging introduction seen from your perspective. Stephen, we've been working, as you well know, with the ITF and the ILO throughout the pandemic and into this year. First on crew change crisis and the drive to get seafarers accepted as key workers, and now on the vaccine rollout front. In terms of global delivery and also access for seafarers, can I ask you to comment on where we are today? And then secondly, what have we learned from the pandemic? What do we need to change in the future? What will be the impact on seafarer labor in the future? And what do we need to change and what do we need to do to change perceptions? Stephen, please.
Thanks, Esben, and thanks to the colleagues on the panel. So first I'll say, sort of echo some of Dito's words and your excellent presentation. First, I'll kind of flip the questions a little bit. First, the partnership model has been exceptional, and my personal thanks to Guy and the whole of the team in the ICS. We have a long relationship, but perhaps in the time of crisis, we've identified how much can be achieved together. And I'll come back to that as we look at the future challenges in a moment. But it is exceptional, and I also represent the civil aviation unions, and the difference between the two sectors is quite unique. So civil aviation's got an amazing health and safety record, all of those issues, but it is very nationalistic when it comes to approach. And we've been suffering from that in the maritime sector because we can't move seafarers. But when it comes to mobilizing around the UN bodies, ICAO, we have got relationships with all those bodies, but maritime has been so much more led by ICS, ITF, in partnership with all those UN bodies you mentioned. I think moving to quickly where we are at the moment, again, to echo some of Dito's words, frustration and perhaps a degree of puzzlement. We probably know collectively, the two organisations, but perhaps I can speak for ship owners as well on this occasion, which is also quite rare and unique. Frustration with government and the level of bureaucracy. It's frankly at different times over the last 12, 13 months been kind of amazing how we can get the people in the room, we can get the statements signed, but we can't then manage their own internal national challenges. And whether that's a national position about medical and those priorities, and we of course respect government's ability to defend their own members, their own citizens, but when it comes to saying who's going to move the medical equipment, personal protection equipment, foodstuffs, the things that give people joy during the day, the things we all rely on, seafarers have actually, we've come out from the shadows and we have got massive media coverage. I've never known us as an industry, and it has been recognizing that we are critical to the response to COVID, and I'd argue critical to the economic recovery that needs to come next. Quickly, still on frustration with bits of the industry that aren't out up front. This new rollout of another level of the pandemic sweeping Europe and other places has identified that we haven't learned the lessons. I have to say to the charterers in the audience, we're frustrated. We know that you are trying to improve the situation, but ship owners need you to collaborate with them to answer the questions. The world is moving on. The world's supply chain receivers, the Unilevers of the world, the multinationals that we know exist at the end of the chain are demanding that you respect human rights and due diligence. And that then brings us perfectly to the Maritime Labour Convention. There's a number, that is a unique ILO convention, and that's built on the back of partnership between ICS and the unions of the world. And then we convince governments. And that wouldn't have been possible in some other sectors. And that was put in place to provide a safety net. And many of the people online today will be providing much better terms and conditions than the Maritime Labour Convention. But it's also critical that that issue about time on board, fatigue, all of the challenges that we identify, of course, the traditional business of unions, negotiating pay and collective bargaining agreements is in place, but we've also kind of left that on the side for the moment while we campaign together. But I think it's critical that we continue to protect seafarers. I for one, I'm pleased to hear Dito's comments that the seafarers are not put off. I'm getting slightly different messages from different nationalities in the sense that families like to know when the breadwinner, and I hope there were more women in this process to our colleagues from WISTA, but they are providers. And when the country is in lockdown because of the pandemic, there's pressure, additional pressure, mental well-being, all of these issues that we need to address. So for me, I'm a little bit worried that we need to give the seafarers confidence about how we tackle the process. I've got one eye on the time, and I did want to talk a little bit about the bigger picture. We, like you, Esben, recognise that the world is changing quite dramatically. So first, there's a list of demands from the receivers of goods, due diligence processes, and we think the industry will not be immune. In fact, we've been working very closely with the UN Global Compact on that area. But the bigger issues coming down the track are what's going to propel the ships of the world through the oceans in a safe way. And of course, our first position will be safety first for the crew members. But that doesn't mean we don't have an opinion about what the alternative fuels could be. And it doesn't mean that we don't want to be party to the conversation. Obviously, STCW is at a critical phase at the moment. And we recognise, frankly, the importance of the IMO when it comes both to climate change and to the future training and skills of seafarers. We equally have an interest in secure, good employment. I think we ought to do some more for women, and we need to look at young people right now because they're some of the worst hit by the pandemic in the economic figures. But for the ITF, and I hope we get some questions on this, we are ready to engage about what does the future look like and what should the working men and women that keep the world's ships moving have to say about it. And that's quite a different dynamic, and we anticipate that technology, digitalization, all of these core issues can happen, but they happen much better in partnership where we take it from both the perspective of the working people, the ship owners and the initial cost, who's going to pay for all this transition, and then how do we get governments, because we've just proven at the beginning of the conversation, governments give us the platitudes. Are they going to give us the money to build a sustainable shipping industry that supports the global supply chain and their economies? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. And of course, I'm happy to hear you say that seafarers have to some extent come out of the shadows, and that, you know, you mentioned national consideration is something we will always be up against. But certainly the and as you also alluded to, the positive in all this is that the level of cooperation amongst yourselves and ourselves and many other associations, it is really quite something. And you know, in a way, it's a pity that it took a crisis to create that environment. But nonetheless, I think we can build on it as you implied. So thank you very much, Maritime. If I can turn to you, we heard from Stephen and Dito the effect of the pandemic on seafarers, and also looked at the role of seafarers and how it is evolving. It's been more than 10 years since STCW, the minimum qualification standard that seafarers must attain. Can our international regulatory framework keep pace, in your opinion? How do we ensure that our seafarers continue to be safely and competently trained? Mighty, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Hopefully. Thank you. And thank you to the ICS for the invitation to be part of this distinguished panel. And in order for me to answer the questions that you asked, I first want to talk about that we have a common understanding of the training infrastructure, including the STCW convention and the training requirements. I think that's very key. First of all, it is important that we understand how the STCW is built and what it is for, and it's to set minimum qualification standards. And it's done in the form of tables of competencies. And the other thing is that the training requirements are in support of the other IMO conventions when it comes to equipment, carriage, and operational requirements. These minimum standards applies to all seafarers worldwide. Therefore, it is important to understand that we cannot incorporate new training or remove existing training based on technological advances on one ship or a group of ships. We're talking about training worldwide. Introducing technology is not something new at IMO. We've done that before. The problem is this is moving very fast now. Now, the model on how it's done when it comes to the training part, it's we wait for the other groups within the IMO to develop the performance standards. The training comes last. That's the last thing that is developed. And most of the time, we're running frantically to try to develop these training requirements to implement them in time for the equipment or the other requirements to come into force. IMO is losing the battle of trying to keep up with technology when it comes to training. I think we did lose that. We saw that when it came to ECDES, we were behind by 2 years. So that's already something that we're all very well aware of. Now, going into the next part that we need to understand is the current training models, which, by the way, failed during the pandemic. The current training model is formal education in a classroom. That's where the majority of the training is done. The training institutions develop their training, the administrations approve the training, and it's done in the classroom. We have on-the-job training, which continues to work, and we have then the familiarization on board the vessel, which is really responsibility of the ship owners to make sure that the seafarers can actually use the equipment and ensure the responsibilities are taken care of on board the vessel. The future model, and we're already seeing it, the seafarers are mobile, and we have specific requirements for different industries. So we need to change the model to make sure in the future, in my view, to go with very general requirements that all the seafarers would have, and then specialized training requirements for the specific industries, and then figure out how we can do the transition from one industry to the other. So now, let me talk about the elephant in the room, which is the STCW convention. The STCW convention is not obsolete. However, it's in need of taking care of it, removing obsolete requirements, and also making some new changes to address technologies coming right now and also in the future. First of all, the STCW convention is divided into the traditional model, deck and engine, 7 functions. Those 7 functions are going to be the key when you talk about autonomous vessel. That discussion is the future and the technology coming in. And why do I say it's the key? When you're talking about technology coming in and autonomous vessel, you need to talk about functions. Which functions are you looking to automate? That is very key. The other issue that needs to be addressed under the STCW convention is the famous Chapter 7, which is alternative certification. The current model, you can have a person with a deck certificate of competency, and then you are engineering. So you need to have one of the two first. We need to change that. We need to establish more of a multi-purpose type of person, which I think is going to be key when it comes to automation in the future. Now, the STCW convention also have flexibilities built in. And I just talked about the chapter 7 and talked about the functions. It has other two flexibilities that we can take advantage of when it comes to interim steps when a new technology coming in. I'm talking about the equivalencies, and I'm talking about also the fact that the ship owners take the responsibility for the familiarization training. Those exist, but there has not been a consistent approach in how they are used. We need to establish that approach so that they become potentially the interim step when the new technology comes in. Now, the removal of obsolete requirements. STCW has a number of requirements that are obsolete, and they need to be removed, and in some cases, they need to be amended. And my favorite example is the requirement for radar, ECDIS, and ARPA. There's no links in the convention within those. So there are some administrations that are providing separate training for each one when they could be potentially provided as one training to ensure that there are links and also that the Seafarer can take advantage of this equipment. Now, the last, also when it comes to obsolete requirements, the other thing that we need to do is to make sure that we make our seafarers more technically savvy. We included in the last review the electrotechnical officer. We need to review those, and then we also need to go back to the engineering requirements to provide more technological and more electronic requirements, digital technologies. I mean, those are the things that need to be amended. When it comes to the sea service requirements, the basis of the certificate of competencies is always that you need to have sea service. There are several studies and anecdotal information that have shown that simulator training can actually be equivalent to sea service. Unfortunately, there are no really studies around the world that have tackled this particular issue. Simulators can be used not only for redress of sea service, but also for training and for assessments. We are in urgent need to do that. The current convention, the countries are making use of simulator through equivalencies. It's been a long time since that started. It's time we include simulator in the proper way. Now, the learning technologies, I started by saying that we failed during pandemic because we were not, the training is done in the classroom. All countries, the majority of the countries were running to figure out how to do virtual training. We need to do that properly. It's not only about the training. Not every training is conducive of doing it through virtual means, but some of it is. We need to identify those, make sure that it's consistent, make sure that also we address potential fraud issues to make sure that the mariner that is actually taking this is who he says or she says she is. So we need to address that. So my last part would be, how do we transition to tomorrow? We need to adapt to a mobile population, mariner mobile population. We need to make changes to technologies and instructional techniques. It will require that we change international regulations and its implementation, and will require a deliberate approach when we do that. And we need to make sure that the training, that the next amendments to STCW are cutting edge, that can grow with needs in the future. And the last bit would be, it has to be done with all stakeholders participating on this. This is coming very fast, and we need to address how do we do that for the future. And thank you very much. I know it's a lot of information, but we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Maiti. Can I ask you one very quick question? You said you divided general requirements, and then you said specific industry. By that, do you mean specific segments within the industry? Okay.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
that's it.
We'll come back to you. So thank you very much indeed. Despina, it is now your turn. You are the CEO of a technology company. From your perspective, what do you think the seafarer of the future will actually look like? This is really one of our key questions for today, I would say. Can you describe the seafarer of the future, and how do we ensure that our industry becomes more diverse, not just in terms of gender, but also in age, skill set, leadership qualities, and so on? Despina, please, over to you.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate today. So I'll start from the basics. The seafarer of the future will look like all of us. The seafarer is not an abstract idea. They are people like you and me, and this is something we should always remember, but more so when we are faced with situations like the pandemic. Our industry is on the brink of a technological revolution that we know is coming. We have increased transparency, increased digitalization, and of course, increased focus on decarbonization and the environment. And I'm talking about how these pressures will change the shape of the ship, figuratively speaking, the asset around which our industry revolves. Without the ship, there's no shipping. And of course, we all know, and it has been reinforced by the situation we encountered during the pandemic, that without seafarers, there are no ships and therefore likely nothing in the shops. But let's look at this through a more nuanced angle here. Over the last decade, we have seen a growing shortage of seafarers as we as an industry found ourselves unable to offer a career to match the expectations of those who were interested in seafaring careers and who instead took shoreside jobs. So there was a gap there. The way we have now as a society treated our seafarers this last year has potentially widened that gap. And even those that have begun careers may be rethinking it for a role ashore, offering more stability, better conditions, and I'm very sorry to say, more respect. This is one of the greatest shames. It is a shame on us collectively for how we fail to support them properly. And it is a shame as many will miss out on a great opportunity. In short, this great opportunity is coming now as we see an industry facing so many pressures to change. You ask about the seafarer of the future. She or he will be treated better and demand respect. They will be able to work from ashore as tools emerge to create digitalization and remote operations in some circumstances. They will be able to handle a range of different fuel ships and a range of digital tools. They will be employed by companies that treat them with respect and look after their career needs, because those that do not will find that they are unable to recruit, and they will probably not accept a voyage for many, many months and without access to the care needed. It used to be that a seafaring career was one for young men with a rebellious nature and a love of the romantic who ran away to sea and grew to be responsible. Or at least that is the gist of the stories told to me by my father from his days on board as a captain 40, 50 years ago. And of course, that is a very stereotypical way to describe it, and we should avoid stereotypes. Seafaring is also a career that offers economic stability. The seafarer of today and of the future is, of course, interested in that stability, but it is also one with a talent for the new and a love of responsibility from the start. We will never be able to get our industry where it is going if we do not trust our seafaring colleagues. There's also still too much of a tendency to treat crews from developing countries as third-rate citizens. These are people who will be responsible for regulatory compliance and efficiency about ever more expensive assets. We need to ensure our crews are respected, understood, and treated the right way. Skin color, nationality, and gender, they do not limit intelligence and capability. You also ask about diversity in terms of gender, age, skills, qualities of leadership. All these are linked together, and it takes courage to identify and use them in an organization. But the rewards of doing so are there to be reaped. Shipping is a diverse industry of many different sectors, and in today's age, many different possibilities are new as new technologies and new ideas evolve. But we need to remember that shipping has some wonderful traditions in the past, and there's a lot of experience that can help us. We also have some great leadership examples to learn from, and even export to other industries. So diversity is a key gain for any company. The more diversity, the more opportunity to find the best way forward, the best responses to challenges, and therefore the best opportunity to transform our companies and our industry and still win. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Despina. That all makes good sense. I think there are quite a lot of questions, but one that I would like to ask all of you, and we'll start in the chronological order that we've presented. So we'll start with Dito. I think the question of leadership is really a very big one. You know, the skill sets and the future requirements. Part of that, of course, is speculation. But in terms of leadership, how do you see that? I mean, how do we ensure that we have the leaders coming into this industry, and you know, given all the many challenges facing, all the uncertainties, the rapid changes, regulatory, technological, and everything else, the leadership will be very important. So what are your views on that, please, Dito? You start.
One of the things I think we ought to look at is our closer industry academic linkages. If you talk to most schools, say even business schools, and you talk to corporate leaders and they reflect on the students coming out of business schools, oftentimes the comment is that they're not ready for what we're looking for. And in the same situation, I think as the industry realizes what we are defining as that future global maritime professional, there has to be a stronger industry academic linkage so that we work backwards into that pipeline and begin to influence the development of individuals in terms of mindset, in terms of skill set, and have the flexibility, as Maite pointed out, to be able to learn and be flexible as change happens. I mean, one thing is for sure, change will happen and will continue to speed up as the ability of computing power changes what is before us. So we talk about leadership. So one thing is create industry academic linkages. I think the other key point that we need to also emphasize is just like how shore-based companies put so much effort and money and exposure to human resource development, talking about the way people are treated, then we've got to bring that same situation onto the ship. The difficulty is that you're doing that on a remote basis. And the other challenge and complexity is that we're looking at multinational and cultural issues on board. But we know the issues, we've faced them over the years, and now we can put our minds and heads together and be able to craft more flexible, more all-encompassing types of programs that will help define the characteristics that we intend to see as our maritime professionals evolve. And if we do that, then the humanity of what these people can do and the humanity of the work that they do will probably be very helpful and will go a long ways in enticing the best and brightest of the next generation that's coming out.
Thank you, Dito. I absolutely agree with you that this, you know, to try and narrow this gulf between academia and the real world in terms of preparing our future leaders is a really important one, and there are efforts underway. But I can't help but think whenever I go to a university and listen to some of the lectures, which I must say I enjoy doing, I do think that there's still quite a gulf between you know, between the two, and the more that can be narrowed, the better. But thank you, Dito. Stephen.
Thanks, Esben, and thanks to Maite and Despina. Excellent contributions and all part of the ingredients about what we need to do about leadership. And I probably have to be careful on both sides of this debate because it's easy to be a little bit controversial. I think we have to look at the structure of the industry, and part of the reason that we've been so successful engaging with the ICS and the IMO and the ILO throughout this crisis is we We just went for the solution and how to respond to the crisis. I've been around the ITF quite a long time, and some of the issues underpinning this is cost. If we want to build a developing employment opportunity for the world's seafarers, and I believe we've pretty much got stable labour markets now, we have to change the ideological approach about who's the cheapest seafarer, because if that's part of the rationale, then you're never going to build an attractive career path. And then I'm going to get myself in trouble with my own crew about a career path, because the reality is we're giving, shipping is one of the success stories of globalization, the redistribution of wealth to the global south, but we also now need to bring in a more dynamic way half of the citizens of the world. We need to create career paths that are gender friendly, and then we need to look at the diversity and you know, you know, the ITF sometimes sees the worst of the worst, including some ship owners. But if we have an aspiration to set up leadership, we have to invest in our own future, which also involves transferring of cost. The idea that shipping should be the cheapest denominator is our own challenge when we want to build, you know, if academia is expensive. We have to have a clarity about what we're trying to understand. Respect was a key issue throughout this crisis, and unfortunately we haven't won that, but I don't think the battle is over. For us and the partnership, you know, we have the IMO who have tried really hard to respond to us, and the team in there has been exceptional. We have the framework, the excellent presentation from Maite about the challenges of bringing the STCW up to speed. Also means we need some of this more forward-looking thinking about what the skills are, but how we invest in that. And you know, there's the issue of cost, but seafaring life is quite tough and does involve long periods away from home. And so those conversations, and maybe as we've all spent so much time on videos, there are elements about how the industry functions that could create more shore-based opportunities for qualified maritime professionals. And there's a conversation there. Now for us, of course, change tends to mean loss of jobs when technology replaces, and we don't really see maritime in quite the same way. It could be that we have to upskill. It could be that we need more diverse and more different skills when it comes to running the engine room, different skills when it comes to navigation, and whether we like it or not, shipping is a tough career, and ships deteriorate if you don't maintain them. So there's a lot of issues here that kind of all need to go on one table. And I think what we've learned throughout this period, and I forgot to mention vaccines earlier, Esben, so you'll need to give me another slot later, but the ability for us all to bring our different perspectives gives us an opportunity to define, with the mutual respect of partnership, how we can rebuild an industry that is attractive. And you know, it's a global industry, and therefore, if we want the governments of the world to take it seriously, we need to have stakeholders from the whole world. And you know, there's been some tough undertones about why some governments haven't let sick seafarers come ashore in certain countries, and those connotations are very much in the news at the moment. And we need to make sure that shipping is a global industry that has no discriminatory elements in it. So for us, it's really big challenging time, but the partnership built over the last 12 months or so gives us a fantastic opportunity to come out of this collaborating and building an industry we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. You know, you make a lot of very good points, and I mean, the truth of the matter is, one reason that, you know, shipping is so efficient is because it's what I call a free business. It's not, you know, airline business. Landing rights are controlled, and it's completely different. Shipping is free, provided you comply with the rules and regulations, and so it's a genuine marketplace. But of course, and so cost becomes a very big issue. But it's clear that cost will have to be looked at differently in the future. I think there's no doubt about that. But Maite, please comment.
Okay, thank you very much. And I do agree with the two previous speakers. And the way that I would agree is I would put it together. The STCW convention has leadership and managerial skill training, and it also have teamwork skills, but it's currently is approved as separate training requirements. So you go for a particular course. I think for the future, we need to look at training that this particular training to be done across the board, every other type of training that you give. When you are doing navigational skills, you're doing leadership and managerial skills there, you're doing teamwork there. So I would look at it all the way from the beginning. And then once you get out of school, then we need to talk about, when it comes to leadership, you also have to talk about company culture, which is a big issue. If I went through school and I got the leadership skills, but the company doesn't have that culture that promotes leadership at every level, I will never succeed as a leader on board the vessel. So we need to look at it all the way from where Dito said, from the training, and then we also need to look at it from implementation when it comes to on board the ship. The other thing that we need to look at is that feedback loop. Once you're a leader on board the ship, how do not only the companies, but how do training institutions, how do the IMO get that feedback loop? What is going on that it's when it comes to leadership skills on board the ships? What is missing? Why can I be a leader as it's supposed to be? But like I said, leadership is not only at the top level on board the vessels, but it's across the board. Everyone is a leader within their specialty. So as I said, we need to look at from the beginning to end to be able to make sure that we have that. And this is going to be important in attracting those that are coming behind. Meaning we're going to have quite the challenge, because we've been on the news of seafarers going on board, seafarers not being able to get off the vessels, to attract new people. And we need to make sure that we think very clear about how that would be done. Again, it's from the beginning to the end. How do I make that leap from the time? And those that have high schools that are maritime, think about it. How do I start at the high school so that I can go all the way to when I go on board the ship? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mighty. That's interesting. I mean, you raised some very good points, but we don't have a huge amount of time left, so I will over to Despina, please.
My comments on the training and the recruitment will revolve a little bit more around diversity. Firstly, we need to make sure that the expected results of training are in line with a diverse workforce and an engaged workforce suitable for the assets of the future or even the very near future. We're discussing STCW and we have the requirements, and I know there are already discussions going on to ensure that the requirements remain fit for purpose. And I'm posing a question here. Should we train people in diversity awareness? Unfortunately, I believe that this may be needed. Then we need to address the societal barriers that are interrupting the drive to encourage a diverse group of people to join the industry, and especially as seafarers, in a positive way. For example, we need to ensure children are supported in and are aware of the opportunities offered. Stephen mentioned before that we have a hard time attracting the younger generation. We need to create incentives and encouragement focused on parents to make them see our industry as a suitable one for their children to start careers in. Then the selection processes to schools and jobs, they must become neutral with regards to gender. We need to make sure that once we have encouraged young girls from all cultures to follow these careers, then we keep the doors open for them. We need to have more diverse role models. The lack of a diversity in role models for many years in our industries made different groups of society consider it as unapproachable. We must make more out of the success stories and understand how everyone has a role to play in the transformation of shipping. Shipboard attitudes and arrangement, they need to be considered. centuries of tradition, and I'm very careful with what I'm saying. And as I said, my father was a seafarer. They have not always bred positive attitudes. The seagoing model needs to be modernized. This is as much about encouraging any school leaver, boy or girl, to consider a career at sea. And we need to encourage more girls to go to sea, as well as pursue technical degrees and other professions that support the growth of the shipping sector. And I will end this with, we need to make more out of the reason for change. Shipping is transforming for the better, in my opinion. It's a personal opinion. And the human factor, people, are an integral part of successful development. This is an opportunity to build a fit-for-purpose maritime industry, one which can take the opportunities that digitalization and technological advances offer, as well as the real benefits of linking supply chains around the world. It means that we will have new roles, new jobs, new industries even emerge. And I think that's a great opportunity for all of us.
Thank you very much indeed, Despina. And actually, I was going to come on to this very subject of diversity, but you've now covered it, which is great, because it's obviously highly topical today, and it seems to be gaining a ground, but not least probably because of the great efforts of your organization WISTA, which has certainly very much raised the profile of women's engagement in shipping over the years. I mean, I've seen it coming, and I would say you've been very successful. So now, what I'd like to do now, we have about 7-8 minutes left. If I could ask each of you, based on what you've heard today, to tell our participants, combining what your own views with what you've heard today, in about 1 and a bit minute each, to give a sort of an overview and a summary and some takeaways that you think could be of interest to our large and diverse audience. So Dieter, I'll start with you, please.
Thanks, Esben. I think 3 takeaways. First, change will continue, change will accelerate, and as change happens, education and training must adjust. Industry academic linkages have to be created in order to bring the whole mindset back to the early stages of the formation of individuals. And education and training must be done with standards that also have to be flexible and have to be developed with change in mind. Second takeaway, business continuity planning has got to take on new dimensions and more of a global perspective. What we've seen today, the frustration that Stephen has talked about and which we've all seen, is a result of the fact that business continuity has probably been built around just an organization. And what we now see is that we've got to bring international dimensions and regional factors into this. Private-public partnerships have to be created in order for us to advance the human and not lose the humanity of the people who work and are a critical component to everything we do. Third item, which Maite and Despina alluded to, and even Stephen, structure, image, and the economics of the shipping industry probably have to be reviewed. Not necessarily overhauled, but let's take a look at it from the different dimensions, because at the end of the day, if we have to be flexible, then everybody's got to be able to give in order for us to be able to move forward. Because what we all realize is that shipping moves the world, and our global maritime professionals ensure that the tonnage that is provided by ship owners will go from port A to port B. So if we're going to be able to have the kind of tonnage enablers that are going to make this a success, then we've got to all be able to adjust in terms of how we are going to position ourselves and the image that we need to provide so that we can attract the best and brightest.
Thank you, Dieter. Good point. Stephen?
Thanks, Dieter. Thanks, everyone. I'll try and be as quick as possible. So just will mention briefly that we are working together with Guy and the team to secure vaccinations, as we believe that's part of the solution. But we also believe reliable data records, whether it's to register, will also be part of that solution. So just very quickly, I think we need to agree the strategy. And the diversity of our challenge is the compartmentalization. So we're privileged to call ICS partners, IMEC partners, the biggest ship owners in the world, but we meet in all different places. So at some level, we've got to kind of elevate this conversation into, when we normally describe it in other sectors where we're trying to build capacity, coalition of the willing. So we need a strategy about how we put all these strands together. We shouldn't fear technology, but as with all workers, you need to give us some confidence and guarantee that we're on that journey together. So that does mean, how do we upskill? How do we protect? And Maite mentioned it, and I think, Esben, you were alluding to the fact shipping industry is really diverse. Compare a bulk carrier carrying iron ore to the latest LPG or a nuclear powered potential engine. That diversity is going to get more, in my humble estimation. So we need a strategy for the whole thing, and we need to embrace that technology. And then the last point, which I genuinely believe, and you won't be surprised about this, that the seafarers will be with us on that journey. So how do we attract the maritime professional for their lifetime? Not for 9 months on board a ship or 3 months. What are we looking to make sure those people, men and women from every part of the globe, will take us on the next generation? And this is where globalization, fair competition, safety nets does make a difference to the world society, but you need to play by the rules. So for us, it's how do we build those rules? How do we have the imagination to make sure wherever you fit in the global society, shipping is an industry you aspire to be part of, because it creates you a bigger opportunity to be a citizen of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, ladies, I have to ask you to be pretty quick here because we're nearing the time, but so Maite, please.
Okay, I'll try to be as quick as possible. We need to study the industry changes and seafarer movements to establish how we're going to move forward. Stephen talked about a strategy. In my view, as I said, today's seafarers are generalists. Tomorrow's seafarers would need to be specialists. Therefore, the convention needs to adapt for that. We need to change the training processes and delivery systems to be able to attract more seafarers and be able to ensure that they can spend more time at home when they're not on board, instead of going to training institutions. The new seafarers coming in do not learn like we did. And the last thing is that the training of seafarers and competent seafarers needs an international focus on training, which means all stakeholders must be involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Maite. Very quickly, Despina, please.
So very quickly, some key points. We have a lot of work ahead of us to keep up the impetus and ensure that words turn into action. And while I'm glad that this has started in many ways, there's a lot to do still. Second one, digitalization and the transformation of shipping away, from our traditional love of staying hidden a little bit into an electrifying, dynamic, transparent industry. It's happening, and we need to start embracing it and collaborating so that we will all make the best of it. And thirdly, we have a fantastic story to tell. Even the recent COVID pandemic has highlighted this. We are a much needed industry, and while we saw crews struggling to get home, let's not forget that this was not because of a lack of effort by ship managers, ship owners, industry bodies. That was not the case. This time, unfortunately, it was because in many cases, governments and elected officials did not understand the role of our industry and the damage they were likely to cause. So we need to keep on talking about our industry, presenting our industry to the world, and explaining the good that we bring to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Despina, and thank you all very, very much. We're coming to the end. I made all these notes and I wanted to do a summary, but we've run out of time. I think each of you have contributed tremendously to this discussion, and I, as ever, I wish we had more time. I'd like to close and by agreeing one point that Stephen made, which I think should be our #1 takeaway from this: the coalition of the willing. I think that this is a very, very good point, Stephen, and I think it really reflects the current situation. I think there is a coalition of the willing, and we must just build on it and make it even better than it has been. finally, in one of my other roles, I'm a vice president of the mission to Seafarers, and I hope that every single person listening to this will put their hand in their pocket, go on the website, and donate some money to the mission to Seafarers. And finally, we have a video which Fiona, I hope, is ready to about the vaccination issue. There we are.
This pandemic has been extremely difficult for everyone. As seafarers, we have to travel across borders, putting us at increased risk of catching COVID-19.
And it's often more difficult for us to go to the local doctor or store if we fall ill. Despite everything, we've kept essential global trade moving.
But due to countries closing their borders, many of us haven't been able to go home or see our friends and families. And we don't know how long that will last.
But there is the good news on the horizon. The vaccine approved by the World Health Organization
could be soon help us to find easier to get with international travel and start making crew change.
The vaccination will provide us with the best possible protection against COVID-19. May also be vital to ensure that we can travel freely across the globe.
With some countries likely to ask evidence of vaccination before we can even travel there.
You have probably noticed that misinformation about the vaccination is spreading faster than the disease itself.
But it's important that we all ignore the gossip and the rumors on social media.
To know what's really going on, we need trust, reliable, independent information from real experts who have the best interests at our heart.
Unions, maritime health bodies, and ship owners all want seafarers to be safe above all else, and to have the information we need to make proper decisions about the vaccine.
They have created a practical guide called Vaccination for Seafarers and Shipping, which will answer all your questions,
including where to get the vaccine from,
which different kind of vaccines are available,
how effective they are,
how they work,
and how they have been produced so quickly.
All this is available now. Just visit ics-shipping.org and download the guide.